Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhunga, tihei Māori ora. Now, just to begin, do we have any apologies for the meeting apart from Councillor O'Keefe? There appear to be none. Do we have any requests for leave of absence at this time?
Thank you, Chair. Friday the 11th of June till Tuesday the 15th of June inclusive.
Thank you. Do we have a mover for that, please?
May I make a request as well?
Yes.
19th to the 23rd of July.
Thank you. Any further requests for leave? Could we have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Watkins. Second, thank you, Councillor Kerr. All those in favour, please say aye. Now, the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the Tuesday, the 23rd of March, and have been previously circulated, could I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Dixon. And a seconder, please. Councillor Sholem. All those in favour, please say aye. And just a reminder to those watching that councillors are using their iPads in the main. All their council papers in deference to the environment are actually on their iPads, and so they will be consulting them pretty frequently. Okay, so our first item...
Madam Chair, please, I'd like to declare a conflict of interest.
Indeed.
With the first item being the Hawke's Bay Regional Sports Park Trust update.
Exactly, so we're about to... Yes?
I'd like to also declare a potential conflict of interest in regards to the public excluded around consents as a property developer. Yes, I'd just like to sing their praises.
Absolutely, absolutely. Those are duly noted.
And I've got a conflict of interest around the first item we're discussing, yeah.
Thank you, and I'm sure I can rely upon you to behave professionally with those issues. So item 4 on our agenda is an update from the Hawke's Bay Regional Sports Park Trust, and I'm going to invite the Chief Executive, Jock McIntosh, to come forward and give us a presentation.
Thank you for having me. It's a while since I had been in touch with you, so I just felt it was timely to give you an update on how things are going with us. In particular, the sort of things that have happened over the last 12 months, briefly in a financial sense, but more importantly, with some of the things that we've developed and some of the things that are on the go over the next little while. That heading there is quite deliberate. I've spoken historically about us having reached stages of credibility and that sort of thing, and we're now at a stage where momentum is really building about the place, especially given the extent of stuff that we've got happening over the next 12 months development-wise. There is a great deal happening, and whilst it's making life quite difficult at the moment to manage the facility, it is a really exciting prospect if we project ourselves out 12 or 15 months to know what's going to come. Firstly, some of the more recent information. Our most recent result was a respectable surplus at 93,000. Now, that was a fair bit down on where we hoped it would be, and much of that was related to COVID. It did hit us, but it could have been quite a bit worse, but it did hit us a bit, and part of it was in that patch there. Notwithstanding that, we've got quite respectable cash reserves now, so it's difficult to be definitive about that number, but that's the sort of funding that we have available for when we have big expenditure items coming up, and we are going to have one of those in a couple of years' time with about a $600,000 spend we're going to need to make as far as the athletics track is concerned. So a big chunk of that money we'll still need to raise, but the situation becomes easier because we've got this sort of number here. And I talk quite often about our sponsors, and I'm going to say that again, I can't stress that enough, especially the Ricketts brothers from Mitre 10. They give us big lumps of money each year, and unless those lumps of money coming in, then there's no way at all that we're going to be able to build up those sort of numbers. So they are really important to us. User numbers, they also took a bit of a hit. We would normally have expected that to be up around the $330,000 figure for that period, but so that was down a fair bit, and that was almost entirely related to COVID. If you think that was about a 6-week period or more that we had pretty much no one at the place, and it came at a period where it's normally chocker. I mean, you just need to turn up to netball and hockey on a Saturday to know what I mean by that. So a lot of that period took out those Saturdays, so that did impact our numbers. So COVID wasn't great. Could have been a fair bit worse. We came through it okay. Spoken a bit about this too, but canoe polo, they're really real standout for us. They hit the ground running. Our facility was open just over a year ago. They've hosted every major tournament in New Zealand since that time. They've done a really good job in hosting those tournaments, and they've occurred throughout the year, actually, the most recent one being in March when we had a very busy week, including a New Zealand Champ event for them. Just like to spend a little bit of time talking about canoe polo because, in my view, they have raised the bar as far as sporting users that we have are concerned. Theirs was a $700,000 build. Canoe polo itself put in a bit over $100,000 into that. They put in about half that amount in terms of volunteer hours. A lot of the stuff that is there actually was physically constructed by them. They've got good skills within the club, and they've harnessed all those skills, and they've done a lot of stuff. As a consequence of that, and in addition to the raw assistance of providing the volunteer hours and the money, which are massively important in getting these things off the ground, probably most important, they've got a real strong sense of ownership about the facility, and it's continuing. Only a couple of weeks ago, they arranged to put a footpath down one side of it, the part that was incomplete, so that's about a 100-metre footpath, 2 metres wide. It's quite a big deal to do that. They've done that themselves. They physically did a lot of the work, and they raised the money to put in the path. So I didn't even know about that actually until it was happening. So they just go ahead and do stuff. And it's a really good example of someone owning a facility and treating it accordingly. They treat it like it's their own. And I'm sort of not necessarily being critical of other sports, but as far as we are concerned, they're the best 10 in inverted commas that we have by miles. Hasn't come to them on a plate. They've had to work really hard to get it, and as a consequence, it's been a really good relationship between both of us. Hard to take a decent photo about this, but pragmatically, Council assisted us a fair bit with this, so it's additional lighting to 4 to 6 netball courts that went in last year, and same for the sports field, so we now light 2 sports fields, fully light 2 sports fields, as compared to only having 1 partially lit last year. Those 2 things are used every night of the week. It's a good example of sports growing. With it comes an increase in need, and between you and us, we're able to meet that need for their requirements. One of the things you also assisted us funding-wise was a storage and amenity building for the sports fields. Actually, what we ended up doing with that was taking an existing 200 square metre facility that was used temporarily by the Community Fitness Centre Trust for a start. As the sports hall was built, that building was no longer required, so we shifted that down to the other end of the park. Next month, that'll be going on a concrete slab at the other end of the park. And the reason I've written that bit in brackets there is because I'm going to be seeking assistance from the users of that facility. So that's league, football, touch. And I'm going to be saying to them, the shed will be on the slab, and we're going to be saying, guys, look, we need some internal walls in this, we need some roller doors in this, and so on. And I'm going to be seeking their support to do that. Part of that's just raw money related, but part of it is related to bringing about a situation with that, as we have with canoe polo with their facility, so they establish some ownership around it. And I can see as part of that, we'll have Mason Vale's name will be above the door, so will Rugby League, Hawke's Bay, and so on. So it'll be, I won't say it's a home for it, that's a bit of a generous description, but it'll be aiming to engender some ownership among those sports of that facility. CFC is doing really well with its developments. This was taken yesterday, and as you can see, there was a massive concrete pour went on for the pool area. They started that literally, they were starting coming in at 3 a.m. in the morning for that. Lots and lots of trucks occurred over 2 days. So, good progress being made on that, albeit these developments are, I'll come to that in a second, but the developments are fairly disruptive as far as the existing operations are concerned, but we're going to end up with a really good outcome at the end of it. So it's something we just necessarily need to suck up in the meantime. Also, one of the Community Fitness Centre Trust developments is the accommodation hostel, and this also was taken yesterday to give you an idea of the stage that's at. Some of the events that we did plan to host over the last 12 months, we did take a bit of a hit in those. So that list there are the things that we needed to cancel in primarily the 2020 calendar year. And some of those are quite big things, especially things like the Mitre 10 Tough Kids Day. There's 2,500 kids turn up on that day. A number of others were quite innovative events, things like the silent disco, things like the Rainbow Dash, and some of those were reasonable earners for us too, but unfortunately they all got canned for COVID-related reasons. But we did host some quite significant events. I don't know if any of you made it down here, but these were the athletics champs that took place in March. Turned into a very busy time for us because these also were delayed by COVID, which meant they took place at the end of March instead of at the beginning of March. But, you know, we love hosting events like that. We had Tom Walsh there, Eliza McCartney was there but not competing, Valerie Adams and so on. So they're a big deal for Hawke's Bay. Actually, we also had Georgia Hulls there too, who won, so local Georgia Hulls, who won the 200 metre women's race here. So that was a fantastic result for Hastings Athletics and Hawke's Bay. Canoe Polo had a New Zealand champs on at the same time. I put the Sky Sport logo there because they got that pop-up channel for Sky to cover the event. We had the pipe band champs week prior to the athletics champs. Didn't get the right photos there. It was a very well attended event. It's a really big deal that I had no idea. Well, I had some idea, but it was a lot more came than I thought would. And actually, this is completely undercooking at this photo because it's one of 2,500 kids that were there that day. So this was cancelled last year, but obviously we were able to host it yesterday, this year. And I don't know if any of you got down to that, but it's great, but it's bedlam. It's absolute bedlam. The fire brigade is there, and you know they shower kids with the fire hoses and all sorts of things. So it's a complete shambles to get the place tidied up. And actually, Ina and her crew did a fantastic job with that. That finished on Wednesday evening, and on Thursday morning, the athletics guys were setting up for their champs, and the event started on Friday. So it stretched us a hell of a lot to be able to get all those things sorted in quite a short period of time. In fact, those events that you've just seen, they all occurred, those 4 significant events all occurred over a 7-day period. So as far as our resources were concerned, we were stretched actually, in retrospect, way beyond a comfort level. And I wouldn't do that again. We got caught in that this year because the athletics events was delayed, and we kind of had to fit it in that time slot or not do it. But I was on a conference call for an external meeting, a Zoom one, while the athletics champs were on, and someone came into my office at sort of the part of this meeting that I was supposed to be presenting at, and the hammer cage, which had just been put in, a new one, had been replaced. Some of the bolts were coming out of the ground, and so I had to go out and try and deal with that. Luckily, it wasn't actually a lot I could have done, but there was a builder on site who could do it. But it just gives you an indication of some of the areas where you can become very exposed when you run to the wire like that. So it was a really tough time. Well, it was a fantastic time, but it was a very difficult time to manage. Alongside that, we did sort of have our usual things happening over that period as well. So that's things like Waitangi Day, continues to grow this event, and this year was no exception. It's things like the Relay for Life It's things like Christmas in the Park, which occurred at the end of last year. So those normal things are still happening. Just a note here. It's not a moan, but it's something for you to note. When we have a major event, it's fantastic. I love having them, and things like the athletics champs were a good example of that. But we got $3,000 in revenue from the champs, and it cost us about $25 to put it on. And so some of that is relating to sort of necessary expenditure. For example, we had to put this in. This is a new hammer cage that went in, but we had to put a new discus cage in too. And the discus cage had to go in because the one that we had, which was sort of fine, but it was the athletics international body had changed the rules and it wasn't high enough, so we had to get a new cage. So you have to have the cage in order to host an event of that nature. But these global bodies sort of change these rules and so on, but when the rubber hits the road, it impacts us quite a lot. So it was a big lump of money that we had to find for that. And it turns out we did get Gaming Trust money for about half of that. So that was good, but still they're quite big things for us to swallow. The next cab off the rank development-wise, as far as we're concerned, I think I showed you this slide last time, but that's the indoor cricket and boxing centre. That's our next main thing. On the money side of that, the original pricing indication we had for that was 1.2, so we raised 1.2. Our original supplier fell over, unfortunately, and it appears that he underquoted for that, so the new price is 1.5, and so it's not that easy to find another 300 grand at this stage of a project when you sort of wipe the sweat off your brow and think you've raised it all. So we're needing to find another 300 for that, and we've got about half of it, but the reason for saying that is because that would normally have been underway by now. It's not underway for that reason. We're nearly there money-wise, but not quite. Accompanied by, I think again I showed you this slide when we last spoke, but this is an outdoor covered wicket, so that also is primarily for CD cricket. That actually has been that's about a $500,000 thing. That's been entirely funded by CD and New Zealand Cricket, so that's a fantastic situation as far as we're concerned. And it'll mean, if you think that we've got the indoor training facility, we've got this, and in 12 months' time we're going to have the accommodation component, quite apart from all the other stuff that exists within the gym. It's a very compelling package for certainly our own cricketers, but also visiting cricketers coming into the region. New car parking is getting underway shortly. When I was talking about it being quite a difficult place to manage with all the development we have on the go, this was the main thing I'm talking about. Actually, I just put out a media statement today, which I hope will be in tomorrow's paper, and it was really saying to the people who are accessing the park on Saturdays in particular, look, I know life's pretty tricky at the moment because parking's not easy. In fact, it's a bit more than that. But we need you to bear with us at the moment because actually what we're ending up with is multi-million-dollar facilities that we, as in users, have actually hardly paid anything for. Almost all of this money has come from sources other than ratepayers. And so I messaged to drivers, please be patient in the meantime. You're going to get something pretty good out of it at the end. But that's it, and it's going to be a very small price to pay given what we're going to have. Now, I'm actually expecting quite a bit of flack as a consequence of doing that in social media and that sort of thing. But I nevertheless need to get the message out there. It is a frustrating situation, but we do need drivers to be a bit patient and in particular not to speed, and I've just got to use every opportunity I can to get that message out. So the existing or pending things we have on the go, the cricket and boxing centre, we've got the outdoor covered wicket, we've got the car parking coming, and we've got under the Community Fitness Trust umbrella the aquatic centre, the sports hall extension and the accommodation hostel. So she's a pretty compelling, that's about $40 million worth of stuff there. It's a pretty compelling set of things that we're having, as I say, at very little cost to the region, so it's a really good outcome. Alongside that, and actually an initiative of this room is some long-term planning for the park. So with the stuff we've got on the go, we are going to be pretty full in 12 months' time in terms of the assets that we have. And so we're about to embark on a planning exercise, which is the partnership between ourselves, yourselves, the Community Fitness Trust and Napier City. And we're jointly funding some outside advice in terms of the sorts of things that we should be planning for, subsequently taking into account sport and rec trends generally and what's happening in our area, and using that to determine the sorts of facilities, which is what we mean by a spatial plan, that we should be planning for over the long term. So we're in the process at the moment of getting a consultant for that. That should be bedded down quite soon. And we expect this to be available in about August this year. So that's a pretty important piece of work we've got coming up. So with reference to my earlier headline, the momentum certainly is building, and there's quite a bit more to come, especially over the next 12 months. It's a pretty good facility. The first bullet point really there is what I've been alluding to before. I don't know that people really understand or appreciate this, but they're ending up with a really, really good outcome for very little cost to them individually. And thinking back to, way back when, whatever councillors were around back in 2008, or Kevin, you were around, the model's working. This is what we intended it to be. In fact, it's working a hell of a lot better than we would have dreamt at that time. What we're ending up with is a whole lot better than we ever would have dreamt. So it's, for me personally, that the financial challenge is always a real challenge. It's hard to stay abreast of all that stuff, but if you look at the bigger picture, it is working, it's panning out pretty well. So thank you, and look, I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Through you, Madam Chair, no question, but just a comment. Having spent a lot of weekends this year down at our beautiful regional sports park, I just want to congratulate you and the Trust Board and the team that put together all of these events and work in harmony with the other trust most of the time. It's a big ask and it's not easy, but sitting alongside the Governor-General at our regional sports park, enjoying the National Pipe Band Championships and handing out the medals and cups, and then the following week handing out prizes to our national athletes. It was a pretty proud moment, and I agree with you. I think the model and the expertise that we've got leading our regional sports park are giving our community something pretty extraordinary and an amazing offering. And when we had all the mayors and councillors from various other regions in the North Island, we took our bus past down the drive and said, this is the best regional sports park in the North Island. They all said, no, ours is better, Wanganui and who else. But we did say that and told them how our model is working. And I think that's the point of difference, actually. So it's not all reliant on rating. And it's a cross-sector responsibility, and I think that's what we can be proud of. So thank you, Jock.
Councillor Watkins.
Yeah. Yeah, Jock, it is fantastic. I mean, it's the flagship of Hastings, I believe, that sports park. I go around there often early in the mornings, and the number of people using the big walking track of all ages is absolutely surprising. I want to know what happened to the 200 bunnies that were living under the 2 40-foot containers. They seem to have disappeared.
I'm blessed if I know, Kevin.
Well done, Jock.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you. Just checking. I was surprised to hear, Jock, that the New Zealand athletic champs don't cover their own costs. Are there any other events that don't cover their own costs?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I'm initially going to answer most, actually.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's a...
Yeah. The whole park is it's an interesting model in that the more business in inverted commas you get, the more you dig a financial hole.
Yeah.
Because it's usually, certainly for main tenants, if we host soccer or rugby league or anyone who uses the sports field gives us about 10% of the cost of providing the facility to them. So the subsidy that we get from the council, that's to assist in plugging that gap.
Yeah, thank you for that. And yeah, I would happen to be there yesterday if councillors haven't been there, but at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there was no parking. Yesterday afternoon. So you can imagine what it's like on a Saturday if you haven't been there. So good luck with the parking, and more than happy to second the
Thank you.
recommendations.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Just to follow on from Malcolm, I was at AUT Stadium or Millennium Stadium yesterday, and user pays, including user pays of parking, and it was quite interesting. The car park was full, but they had exactly the same meters as what we actually have in town. So whether that's something that's been looked at in the future, doesn't necessarily mean that it's the entire park, but an aspect of it in some way or other.
Yeah, look, it's a good point, and we looked at that, but it'd be a while ago now, as part of our initial planning, and determined at the time that Hawke's Bay wasn't ready for it. But it is a good point, and actually on Monday I'm presenting to the Regional Council in their long-term plan as far as, I just forget the name of the parking initiatives, the public transport initiative they've got on the go. Because another frustrating part is that I'm sure there's a lot of vehicles come that don't need to come, or certainly don't consider carpooling or anything like that.
And just the other observation was, wow, we did quite a centre like that. We have quite a bit of two different ones. Must be a thing for someone maybe built right across the road, be a brand new one. So just adds to the whole, as well.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't really mention this enough too, but Sir Graham is, it's amazing what he's been able to raise money-wise to bring those facilities about. The pool's something we've coveted for a long time.
So thank you for that. We had a mover and a seconder for that recommendation on page 7. I'll put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
I'm now going to invite Gary Jones to come forward and give us a brief verbal update, and perhaps just remind him that we are being live streamed.
And if I can just, by way of some introductory comments, obviously we all know for Hastings and Hawke's Bay, we are a food-producing, export-based economy that we've never seen, that being more important than in a post-COVID environment. That a lot of the positive growth that's happening in Hastings is off the back of nearly a decade of huge land use change, the investments in R&D, new varietals, a sector that's grown from $300 million to $900 million of value in our economy. We've worked very closely through the civic leadership of Sandra and the council with our industry leaders to take a plan to government in what has been a pretty challenging season, with the obvious challenges around closed borders and a limited ability to bring RSE workers in. But as council are aware, we were the only region in New Zealand that put up a comprehensive plan to government for how we would manage the season. And as council are aware, the mayors and industry leaders have just written again to ministers and are engaging with the government about a longer term industry transition plan. But we thought it would be really important, given the investment of leadership and money alongside the industry and things like Pick the Bay Expos, working with school principals, just to get a sense of how did the actual season go against the plan that we created, and just a little bit of a looking forward. So Gary, just want to acknowledge how lucky we are to have you in Hawke's Bay. I've known Gary for a long time. He was one of the original architects of the RSE program. I think a lot of people don't know, Gary's the, board member on the Global Gap, has led a lot of work around labour standards, food standards in our industry. And so I just want to acknowledge you, Gary, say thank you for the awesome job you do, and welcome you to give us an update on the season and a forward view.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll probably tell you some things you don't know, hopefully, about the industry and introduce you to it and why it's going so well, how it's placed globally, what its aspirations are. We'll touch a few of the challenges. And this slide just shows you we're 66% of the apple and pear industry here in Hawke's Bay. The offices for New Zealand Apple and Pears, of which I work for, is an industry levy-funded body based in Hastings, because a long time ago we saw that this was the area which was going to grow, and we're careful. It is a public meeting, and perhaps some people from Nelson might be listening in, but it's a Goldilocks environment, as we say. You may be aware that the cold current from Antarctica off our shore keeps our I know it's cold at Waimara when you're swimming, even in January, February, but that keeps us comparatively cool here, and we don't have the huge fluctuations in climate that you might have at a similar northern latitude of 39 degrees. We have this oceanic environment, means that we don't have the chilling injuries in spring, nor the heat through summer. We have the perfect environment to grow apples, and within that, we are by far the most productive industry or region in the world. At 61 tonnes a hectare, we're almost 50% more productive than anywhere else on the planet. And we will be, providing we manage our climate change reasonably well, we will always have this competitive and comparative advantage. There is no other oceanic environment, perhaps Tasmania, where apples are grown, and this provides us with a unique opportunity not only to have great productivity, but we've also invested in a lot of other things which I'll touch on later. This is Belrose Corporation, based out of Washington State University, ranks all the countries in the world about the most competitive, and New Zealand Apples has, up until the last ranking, he's retired now and it's stopped, but we're 4 years in a row are the most competitive, and I don't think at any stage necessarily we would lose that in the future, and we'll go into some of those reasons. Just looking out, this is our projections out to 2030 and growth per hectare. As Nigel says, we've been growing pretty strongly, 3.5% compound annual average growth in hectares. This is a national figure, not a Hawke's Bay one. But that was, that's been going for almost 10 years now, sitting around 3.5% compound annual average growth in the area. And if we look at that going out into the future, this is business as usual. With the growth trajectory around Hawke's Bay and the Ruataniwha Plains here on the Heretaunga Plains, Wairoa, there's some real growth happening, and it could be up to 50% by 2030. And that's, as I'm saying, that's the trajectory without some transformational opportunities, which I still think we have up our sleeve. Metric tonnes relates to labour and a lot of other things, but again, if we just look at that, with current productivity, it's sitting there. We'll have some growth in productivity, I think, as we move to 2D orchards, higher productive varieties. You look at the envy and the like, which is much, much stronger. So we'll grow more off less, but this is a BAU thing. But I suppose the key one I want to sort of focus on is the value growth. It's been since 2010, 2011, the growth in value of the apple industry, driven mainly from Hawke's Bay, has grown at 12.5% compound annual average growth. So you compare your 3.5 in area with 12.5 in value. We've gone from being just over a $300 million industry to a $917 million industry. And if you can show me any industry starting at a reasonable chunk, 50, 100 million, that has grown at that trajectory in New Zealand, please tell me, because no one's been able to yet. This is the fastest growing industry. This is a unicorn, almost, because it's all plant tech. It's the technology which is driving this, and I'll touch on that as we go. But there is a hiccup, and this is what Nigel's talking about this year. And this is our conservative estimate of the loss in earnings for Hawke's Bay, or loss in volume for Hawke's Bay, driven by a labour shortage. This is March, and there's only downside on this. And at the bottom right-hand figure of 1.338 million boxes is likely to have some slippage, and that's about 70 or 80 million at the moment. And we're very worried about what that will mean to investment of that 3.5% compound annual average growth. And it's the signals it's putting out there to investors that are reasonably, we're reasonably optimistic. Hence, we're working extremely hard, and Nigel has shown great leadership, to bring the industry here together cohesively. It's Nigel's experience of Wellington probably has helped us in that we've sort of muddled along all right, focusing on the planet and feeding consumers globally, and we've thought less about perhaps our resources here. We can touch on that as well, but certainly those labour resources. And RSE gave us some complacency. Hawke's Bay's allowed 5,400 RSE. My last conversation with the late Annie Aranui, we agreed that with MSD as partners, that 5,400 would be our peak. When you look at those numbers, we're flying 1.5% of the entire Tongan population to New Zealand. We're the biggest employers of Tongan Samoans, Vanuatu, Nivans, is New Zealand and mainly Hawke's Bay apple industry companies. And it's interesting in that conversation when you talk about our economy and their economy being so intimately linked at a social and an economic level. When we host leaders, and Nigel's and Sandra are great hosts when we have leaders coming from offshore, used to, of course, that we need to host them, and they do. We talk about with them that in a global context, that ensuring that they support the apple industry in their global forums and relationships, such as WTO and trade, etc., that they remind other countries that Samoa, Tonga, Vanuatu are closely linked to New Zealand's horticultural industries and viticultural industries, and that we need to look at trade and how the economic benefits of global trade filter back into the islands. This transitional plan that Nigel talks about looks at that in the long term around that close economic relationship and the intertwining of our countries. But the risk here, if we turned a corner right now, we would lose about 3.1 billion by 2030. And at that time, we would be returning around about $600 to $700 million more a year than we do now to Hawke's Bay. So this is a place. At some time in the future, we may look back at this this COVID impact on labour as being something that created a major impact for our economy in Hawke's Bay. A bit like Wakatu closing. It may not be exactly the same reasons, but this could be a big change for us, especially with the advantages that I've mentioned, and then suddenly an inability to exploit those opportunities. And in terms of labour, this is permanent labour growth out to 2030. We are looking at least another 1,136 permanent positions, and we're looking at across a whole range of areas within the Orchard Gate. And we're looking at a lot of high-paying roles, and here we've broken them down. We know exactly where these people should reside, but there's a lot of jobs in here which are very, very well paying. And that, of course, we need to be thinking about with our Centre of Vocational Excellence here in Hawke's Bay, how we might ensure that we're providing our community, rangatahi, with the right qualifications and skills to share in the value of the industry.
Gary, can I just ask a clarifying question on that?
Yeah.
When you talk about jobs, how far beyond the, like in the wider ecosystem, when I think about all of the businesses that are growing here in Hastings, like the rapid uptake of infrastructure, I'm thinking about Hydroladder that's just taken on 4 hectares, all the companies that exist to kind of serve the primary production sector, is it that wide when you're talking about the job numbers, or more narrowly about...
These job numbers are inside the fence.
Just inside the fence, so the actual multiplier effect is much bigger than...
None of this has got any multipliers.
Thanks.
So the seasonal labour growth equally is a bit eye-watering, and especially under its current conditions. But what I'll probably point out quickly now is, we hear a lot of talk about over-reliance on migrant labour. And I did a calculation recently in the last week or two when the Productivity Commission report came out, and I was I thought it was a little bit shallow in how to analyse some of the migrant labour exposure for an industry such as ourselves, so I thought I'd do a little bit of work on it. They tend to look at individuals as being, well, I'm not sure how long they work for, but if you've got a migrant worker, then you've got a migrant worker, and you've got a permanent worker over here, and they compare it. But we only use, say at harvest, we're using, in Hawke's Bay, 3,000, this year about 3,000 workers, a bit over 3,000 workers from, say, RSE. There's no working holiday scheme people to speak of. But in any normal year, say it was usually about 4,400. We know that that if you bring it out to an FTE, that it's really sitting around about 19% of our workforce is RSE as an FTE. 73% of it is New Zealanders, an FTE value. If you look at 12 weeks for harvest or a short time for harvest, is the point I'm making. And that's not how the Productivity Commission evaluates that. So we're very exposed in that 79% of our apples are picked by migrant labour, and 79% of our apples are packed by New Zealanders. And of course, our permanent workforce are New Zealanders. So we have this blip that if we don't pick in that 12 weeks, we don't have any other jobs. And that exposure, but also that opportunity that a very small amount of migrants created this huge opportunity for our supply chain or value chain. And then we pass them off. Most of them go mainly into wine pruning and Marlborough, but some go up to kiwi fruit. But we pass them on to the next industry who also has this huge opportunity to use them and employ their permanent staff and support their ecosystem. So we need to do some work on it. Our transition plan that's been introduced is going to explore that in a much more strategic way with government. I just want to change a bit of a corner now and just to give you some idea around what's driving the industry. And of course, on the left-hand side, you can see, I'm sure you're aware of the climate change challenges. Protectionism is around, post-Trump even, we've still got issues, the WTO appellant councils, the SPS, the sanitary, phytosanitary appellant councils, where you may take trade issues too. Still hasn't got its full complement of judges and can't hear cases. And it's the US have started with Obama, they haven't been supporting that. So there's some structural issues around protectionism on the planet at the moment, and that's small examples. But if you talk to MFAT, there's some real panic around this, real worry. Of course, our pandemics, we knew that population growth globally is challenging to feed. How are we going to feed this planet 10 billion people by 2050? Food security is becoming a real issue, and there are resource constraints. But I think, look, we have these huge opportunities here, and our IP around our products, our new varieties, the way we grow them, sustainability, and partnerships are going to be very important in the future. So rules-based trade's under threat. We need more relationships, and it's got to be about flourishing communities. So I'm thinking about the Pacific and the win-win situation of migrant labour, and how can the Hastings community flourish with all the other communities which are touched by apples. And I want to touch on a few things on that, especially around measuring trade success through mutual prosperity or flourishing and our communities. And we'll just move into that shortly, and I'll just give you an idea of how the market is pulling us, or how the demand side of the market is driving us for growth. And this is a pre-COVID analysis of the grocery trade at 2.6 trillion in growth through 19 to 23, where most of it is in Asia. And there'll be a huge amount in Africa, but it'll be a bit of a delay there. And this is where we're focused. We have very, very good genetics and very, very good IP that we're developing for the Asian markets. So if you think about the apples, which we've had, the Queens, the Dazzles, Envy, and the like, we've got pears, the Peekaboo series of pears that some of you may or may not know. This intellectual property is very focused on Asia, and they're taking everything we can grow at the moment. And we're exporting to 70 markets. So the exposure of China, it's a bit over 10%, but we have a really very, very diverse set of markets. In fact, Vietnam, I think, sitting about number 4 at the moment, and is probably one of the strongest growth areas. Japan, with only apple industry exporting to Japan, we have 3 times the growth over last year. Last year we did 45 million of trade into Japan. At the moment, we're sitting on 3 times that. We could break $100 million. It's astounding, and we've disrupted that market. It used to have apples which were peeled for gifts, big, large apples, you'd peel them and you'd cut them up and hand them out as gifts. It was very much an older person's style culturally, and now we've got a huge number of young people eating apples for health every day with the skin on. It's a complete just change. It's fundamental disruption of the market. And because of our systems, we get the fruit in there which has got pest-free. It's pest-free. The Japanese have a very, very tough hurdles to get into the market because of its pests, and our competitors can't. And we're in there disrupting the market, and everyone knows our apple's there now, and so we're leading in that space. And this is what drove it. And I use this slide because I just love the old style of it. This is the wild apple forests in Western China, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan. In the 90s, Plant and Food Research, I think it was called, it might have been DSIO almost in those days, but they went into those markets, went into those countries. They brought back over 5,000 pieces of genetic material. We've got them in our research stations here in Hawke's Bay and Hastings here at the Haviland North Research Centre. For apples, the pear genetics is down in Nelson, and we're producing the world's best apple and pear varieties. Fundamentally have our futures locked into very, very good varieties. And it's just, it was a foresight, these scientists on the left there, which were, in the 90s, wandering around these hills and picking up this material, bringing it back. And it's been used in the program to create all sorts of stuff. And many of you will be aware of this, the rockets, the jazzes, which are a bit older now, the Envies, dazzles, which is more new, the peekaboo pear up there, which is a fusion between Asian and European pears, the only breeding program in the world that's done that. Naturally bred both those and put them into the same fruit. It's basically a new fruit type, and yes, we can't produce enough of it at the moment. And there's a few challenges with all of this, but the opportunity is huge for us. And when I talk about, and I made a point just before to talk about flourishing communities globally, this here's a Korean apple grower that I visited just recently. We have more apple growers growing our intellectual property in South Korea than we do in New Zealand. And we don't export apples to South Korea because we have phytosanitary challenges. We've got some challenges to get over, which we're working on. But a lot of that is around, South Korean apple industry probably doesn't want us to export a whole lot of apples there at the moment. But the key there is to work with the industry to realise that counter-seasonal supply 12 months a year of product, and even the opportunity to export out of these Northern Hemisphere countries themselves as industries. So growing fundamentally their capability and ability to create value is key in an environment where rules-based trade is under threat, and it's going to become about relationships and working closely for generations. So our view, and I bring in India here, which is a huge opportunity around apples as well, Japan amongst others. These countries we are and have pre-COVID been working to create much stronger relationships in an environment where we look to deploy this intellectual property we've got in a way which isn't throwing baby out with the bathwater. We're not looking at places like risk for gold kiwi fruit, which we see in China having some challenges. There's opportunities to protect better than that. You don't necessarily put in your absolute gold chip IP, intellectual property, into any market, but creating a relationship with these countries and their growers for the long term means that we will be able to secure that market, keep a stable market, and then be able to potentially grow our fruit there and export it again. Now, India is an interesting case, and we spend it costs us about $23 million, $25 million a year in import tariffs. That's cash. And so for Hawke's Bay, it's about $14-15 million of cash is lost in import tariffs and duties going into India at the moment, 50%. And our view is that we may be able to work to remove some of that, but it will take us having a much better relationship and a much more prosperous mutual relationship with the Indian industries to do that. Now, I absolutely think in terms of this relationship building is that Hastings has a key opportunity here to host and be part of that, because it's community to community. And I think that's a really cool thing I'd like you to take away. And I know I've talked to Sandra and Nigel that unfortunately COVID stopped it, but we had every week we were having South Korean provinces and delegations, provincial governments coming in, saying we see how vibrant your region is, and we want to learn how to create that in our region, because the tech companies and the digital technologies are dragging all our young people into Seoul, into the big cities, and it's gutting our regional and communities. And somehow you guys have got the formula in New Zealand which seems to be working. And if you look at the kiwi fruit and apple industries and the model that you've got under your nose, it's really working. It's helping to have a really flourishing communities and sustainable, and employs a lot of people, and it's exciting, and it's got a lot of technology. So they get it, and it's interesting, you know, we talk to our central government in Wellington, and we sometimes think that they don't quite understand just the opportunities they've got. Just with that, the intellectual property, is that the breeding program is owned by New Zealand Apple and Pears. We own 55% of it, and Plant and Food own 27% of it, and the residuals with the Australian apple industry, but we essentially control it now. And that will provide us with some significant revenue over time. So the production-based royalties from these new varieties growing globally provides New Zealand Apple and Pears with a significant revenue stream through into the future, and that's going to be reinvested in that supply chain and our growers here. I want to finish shortly, so you have some chance for some questions. This is where we've got to now. From a simply pest and disease here at phytosanitary, we've moved into a situation where plastics are being regulated, the environmental plans that we're having to do. We have a modern slavery legislations globally that we have to meet. Social practices relates to that. The trade securities around security of site, track and traceability, ethical trade. There's a whole lot of private programs, and it's about the intangible. So I mentioned just quickly. I've mentioned the tangible asset, which is the variety. The systems under which it's grown is the other huge value that we've created in New Zealand. That's around our ability to grow these, and I use these three apples. This one's obviously got a bruise, and it's a tangible defect. These are the same apple basically, but one is growing. One is worth twice as much as the other one, even though it's simple raw gala. But this one here, for example, might be the worth less. It was a lot of apples that we found a codling moth. You know, might be 1 million apples in that lot, one codling moth, half the value. So your production systems create a whole lot of value in intellectual property, and that's all based on science and research and integrating that into it. And you know, you've got these very, very strong integrated and organic programs here in Hawke's Bay, which are providing 70 countries in the world and some very tough hurdles. Through very tough hurdles, are providing the highest paying consumers in the world with their product. And so the tangible asset in the variety and its genetics, and then the intangible asset around production systems is the big value added drivers which has created such growth in this industry. And it's these this is a European media campaign by a group of NGOs that happened around about 10 or 12 years ago. And the point I like to show here is what they did is they gave Lidl and Metro, two of the very, very big German retailers, awards for having the highest residues on their fruit. And overnight, they completely rechanged their procurement systems for all European supermarkets. And they, whilst you have regulatory residue programs, they brought in a whole lot of private ones by all these different supermarkets. And essentially it means it's very, very difficult to supply product with basically no residues. However, we do. So to give you a bit of an idea of how well we're doing in terms of our production systems to provide fruit to market, which I've already said don't have pests on them, but we also provide fruit to market which don't have any pesticides on them. This is out of the US Consumer Report. So the equivalent of our consumer.org.nz, this is consumer.org. Here it is down here, or consumerreports.org. So it's a public-facing site. They recommend New Zealand apples over their own. That the lowest is, the lowest, US is high. So a good outcome for out-competing our rivals in their own market. The USDA and EPA measure apples, and if you look at these numbers here, I'll probably get them around the wrong way. I think the toxicity rating that the EPA put on Chilean apples was about 19 times higher than New Zealand's, 28 times higher than New Zealand's, and I think the US was 19. So in order of magnitude better, we have a program now which provides fruit with, it's not residue free, but it's at at the limits of detection, the very best profile probably of any fruit or vegetable sector on the planet. I know no one who's doing better than us. And we're doing it through all sorts of technologies, and a lot of it's compatible in the organic space, especially around pests. And this is sterile insect technologies, which is we're doing some work in Central Hawke's Bay around releasing, and Arctic walnut, releasing sterile codling moth males, and they outcompeted the non-sterile males, the resident population, and they were unable to breed, and we basically have crowded out the entire population of codling moth in the Botanical Plains. I think we've captured one down there in the last 2 years. It's an absolutely key pest of ours. COVID stopped this because we were flying them out from Canada on a New Zealand flight and releasing them in 24 hours using this hexacopter from Plant Food Research around the orchards, and then we can't get them at the moment. So, but there's still no residual population, takes forever. Look, just to give you a quick heads up, glyphosate, we're just doing work now to farm without glyphosate. EU's really looking at it 2022. It may not they may not re-register it. Germany's already back going to ban it 23. Austria banned it. Everyone else is looking at it. We're going to have to farm without glyphosate. Everyone's going to have to. The supermarkets will demand it. Some of them are already demanding it now. The Green Deal, if you haven't heard about the Green Deal, I'll supply you a paper on it. This is the EU aspirational approach to sustainability. It will affect us here, and this is the integration between the market and our dirt here. We will be having to implement systems and processes to make sure we can get into the EU, meeting their sustainability requirements. Just think about the FTA at the moment. I put this slide up because I was in the Netherlands when this occurred, just pre-COVID, a few months before the lockdown, and the Netherlands was found to be non-conforming with the EU nitrogen emissions. They put some proposals up to farmers, and the farmers reacted. Now, the Dutch don't normally react. This is not the French. If this was France, you go, oh yeah, that's every week. This is not how the Dutch react. But sitting in with them, and I met with them, I was travelling with some the Special Agricultural Trade Envoy, Mike Peterson, of course, who's a local chap, and we met with the Dutch Dairy Farm Association, and I can tell you they are not happy with New Zealand sending anything up there unless they meet the same requirements as they do. And so we have to think of ourselves in this global community, and this is the stuff which is really driving our thoughts and our research at New Zealand Apple and Pears, and very keen to keep involved, especially as it relates to the council's activities as well. Modern slavery, don't underestimate this particular beast. It hides in plain sight, and all those other things. New Zealand has a modern slavery problem, believe me. We have a modern slavery problem in Hastings, I'm sure. It just will hide. And we've had court cases here recently from old historical cases, but when there's labour shortages, things, people get exploited, and people won't whistleblow. They'll accept it for different reasons. It's a real scourge, and we're doing a lot of work within our systems to bring in ways to look to root it out. It's quite a bit going on in that space where we'll be bringing into our supply chains to look to eliminate it. But I'm the first to say publicly that that we've all got a problem. We've got a problem to sort out in our industry. I think we've been doing a pretty good job, but no one. The first thing is to you need to look, and you need to look hard, and you can't rest on this sort of thing. And if we want to bring in thousands of workers in the Pacific, we need to make sure we're exemplary employers, and that's my goal. And we're not going to rest.
I want to touch on, Gary, I thought one of the great Hastings story was another Hastings innovative firm called Ask Your Team, and how you've used Ask Your Team and what's going on globally with your...
You want me to start talking? I don't know how much time I've got.
I think it's just worth mentioning that because it's such a great example of, again, things that Hastings is doing leading the world.
Yeah, so Nigel mentioned I'm on Global Gap. So I'm on the Global Gap International Board. I'm one of 7 producers globally, only one in the Southern Hemisphere. And we've also got people on the GRAS Technical Committee of Global Gap. Now that's the Global Gap's risk assessment for social practice. And we've been crafting some, it's private standards which are driven through the retail supply chain. You can export fruit, but you can't get it into a retailer, the high-paying retailers, unless you have very high systems which are independently audited. And so Global Gap crafts those systems. There's 7 producers and 7 retailers sit around the board, and every committee has half retailers, half producers. And essentially the retailers say, well, this is what our consumers want, and this is our consumer risk. If I showed you the Metro and Lidl pesticide stuff, that's the risk they face, and they bring these systems in to insulate themselves. Now, we know in modern slavery that it's a real hidden issue. So we bring in a system which essentially looks at a business and orders it to some pretty sanitary, just normal sort of hygienic standards, contracts, all the rest. What's the issue globally, and it's been seen to be a real challenge, is around the voice of the employee and actually elevating that in an audit. And you have to do it one-on-one in an audit situation, which becomes pretty expensive and generally not very, generally the employers are able to influence it. And if you think in a global context, which I have to for my board position, is that everyone's very, very remote globally. We've got 1.5 million workers within Global Gap, and some of them are a long way from, and actually getting to them and interviewing them is difficult. So Yash, your team here is an online digital survey company which does business surveying systems, and I asked them a few years ago, I said, can we get out to people through their digital devices? Everywhere in the world you were able to travel, you would see the aspirational first purchase of any young person as a digital device and connectivity. And so we just said, well, this is where it's all moving. Let's see if we can push out assurance systems directly to the employee, into their device, into their homes in a private way, even after they've finished work and perhaps travel back to their home countries, and ask them some of these questions that the UN Sustainability Development Goals have around slavery and our own grass stuff. So we've done that. We've done a number of pilots. We've got a person in Wellington reporting to modern slavery group down there today. But what we did is for the RSE, we translated it into the 4 main languages, and we put it out to 2,500 RSE a couple of years ago, one of our prototypes, and got a whole lot of information back. And all of it was pretty good, actually, but there were some issues that we could find and was worth exploring. We've done 2 more pilots since then, including brought in a whole lot of contractors, and we've opened the eyes to the contractors to stuff that they would never have known was happening within their businesses. And often it's just 1 or 2, perhaps in different companies, a supervisor, which is problematic, and that's around how they treat workers. And you remember we had issues here not that long ago with poor management processes, and I think asking that would have certainly helped understand some of the concerns of the Solomon Island group that was involved with that particular unsavoury incident. But we're looking at using this in a global context to access tens of millions of workers and pulling in real data. And what it helps us with is when we have people-to-people auditing, which is what you only want to use when you think you've got a problem, it allows us to know probably where there's not an issue and to apply our limited human resource into looking where there's heat spots. So we're leading in this and watch this space. I think we will revolutionise this assurance approach to modern slavery. I think that's where we're at. Well, look, this is our sort of, we're talking about this, and we've sort of had these thoughts for a while. The opportunity, I mentioned that we've got these global environments. I really think that if we've got about 1,500 growers globally, only 257 in New Zealand. We're growing 400,000 tonnes of export crop at the moment. We're growing another 200,000 tonnes of our IP globally, offshore. They will invert. We will have a bigger New Zealand apple industry outside New Zealand for the next few years than we have in New Zealand. And that community is something that Hawke's Bay, through its Centre of Vocational Excellence, could play to. And we're interested in exploring that. And we believe that the people that are entering this industry are going to have a much more global view and much more global influence than they currently have. And we certainly believe that plant-based foods are the key, and Hawke's Bay is the best place in the world to grow plant-based foods. We have that leadership position. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Gary, very good presentation. I really enjoyed it. One of the best I've seen in a very long time. And each subject area you brought up is a subject on its own. In fact, when you put those apple varieties up there, I thought, I didn't recognise Royal Garda. None of those were around when I was growing fruit. Just amazing the way it's developed. I want to get back to the RSE scheme that you started off talking about, and you gave a figure of 1.5% of total Tongan population involved in the RSE scheme. I presume I've written that down right.
That's right.
I sometimes feel that we don't emphasise enough the value that we're providing to countries, beneficiary countries like Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu, perhaps others. I just wondered, do we know what impact we're having on their GDP in these countries? I mean, 1.5% of the population, that would almost suggest we might be supplying 5 or 10% of their total economic value in remissions.
Well, I think you're probably right. I think 40% of remittances is a general rule of thumb across the Pacific. What part of that would we be? Half or a quarter of it? We probably are a quarter. I would think Nigel's probably got better information from his days. There is work done on that. But yes, a very, very big chunk of every country's GDP is coming back from here.
So one of the things, Councillor Nixon, when I headed up Immigration New Zealand and in a broader international sphere, if you think about some of the things that Gary's touched on, a global population that will be over 10 billion by 2050. This part of the world that we're in, the Pacific, across Australasia, Polynesia, Micronesia, Melanesia, only 100 million of that 10 billion world population, with a third of the world's water and oceans. The need for a stable, prosperous Pacific. And so the things that I think, if you cite the evidence, basically the World Trade Organization and the International Labour Organization have studied this to death and call it the best circular temporary migration program in the world, with triple benefits, they call it. It makes a huge difference in terms of it's the best form of aid because it involves no bureaucracy. It's people earning real money and taking it home, skills transfer, micro enterprise in the home countries. Basically has helped New Zealand, let's be honest, with the certainty of labour supply grow its industry. And the evidence, certainly last time I read the research, is it has not caused any significant displacement of local workers.
Nigel, you've almost asked every question I might have wanted to ask myself. And my sort of finishing comment is there more, should we be doing more to try and get that across? Because I've always supported the RSC scheme, and that's one of the key reasons I've supported it, because it does get the money in the hands of people where we want it to be, in villages and so on. Is there more we should be doing to try and get that message across, to increase your effectiveness? Because we've had a problem this year getting workers in, and yet other industries have had less trouble getting people in. And I just wonder, how can we improve our performance? Because it's not just about your production. I think it's what happens to the money at the other end.
Yes, and look, I think there's more that you could do, and I just want to start with that. We've raised our game about the amount we pay, and there's been a significant amount of extra pay now for people. The living wage is becoming more the norm. There's been a 19% increase in bin rates this year. We're looking at, I've surveyed 800,000 bins of production. So look, we need to do more of those things to warrant your support. You need to have confidence in us. And I mentioned the slavery stuff. You have to be exemplar, and I want to give you that confidence that if you do support us, that you're not going to find a can of worms or anything. So I think those are really, really important. The Pacific, this mutual flourishing communities is so important. When you think about the size of Hastings, and if we had the full amount, 5,400 RSE workers here in March next year, say, if we got that, and how it's a big part of our, that's such a big part of our population. I mean, that's just a huge number of your community, which comes in from the Pacific. So yes, I think these are your people. That's what I like to think. They're certainly ours, and the same person comes back year after year after year. We invest in them, and they're a permanent seasonal workforce. We know their communities. We visit them every year. We know, it's really, really personal. I think the messaging to government is that, what we can't understand is that the Pacific, Samoa, for example, is COVID-free, never had a case. And we bring them into the one place in New Zealand where we know there's COVID. And we stick them in an MIQ, and then we send them out to our industries. And I can assure you, because if we found a case of COVID in one of our supply chains, Chinese government has insisted on the immediate shutdown of that supply chain from that company and a full product recall. So with that risk, boards of a lot of our players went and looked at this and went, I'm not trusting MIQ. I'm going to isolate staff out of MIQ when they get to Hawke's Bay, to make sure that I don't destroy my business. So you're sitting there going, well, why doesn't, if we can get Australians in without MIQ, why can't we get the Pacific in without MIQ? I just don't know. No one's been able to answer it yet. I just want people to ask the question.
I think historically it's not that direction that there's a problem. I mean, we're very aware of the effect of New Zealanders on Western Samoa during the the Spanish flu. And I think the risk is that we introduce that disease into their population, which is much more vulnerable.
And that's your repatriation flip side, isn't it?
Exactly.
At the moment, we're just extending visas all the time. So, and I think that maybe where things may go is that we'll just end up with quite a large group of Pacific Island workers stuck here until we vaccinate. So we're certainly working with the DHB here to vaccinate RSE workers before they leave, and we're certainly working with government and MFAT around how we might vaccinate workers before they arrive, and also how we vaccinate our broader employees within our supply chain and their households, of which we represent all the at-risk parts of the community.
Thanks, Gary. I think we're seeing from the same style sheet.
If I could add one thing, I think the thing that perhaps, and this is part of work going forward with the government, is we know labour supply is just one part of the story that we need to tell in RSE workers. The thing that I'm not sure how wide it's understood in our community is all the world's IP sits in a shed in Havelock North around apples. Everything that's driving the value, like $300 million to $900 million in the Hawke's Bay economy in the space of a decade, is actually quite a big deal. And there's actually a huge number of jobs outside of what goes on orchards that is actually linked to this industry. And and I think that KPI around the production systems and getting apples picked drives so much in our economy, and I'm not sure how well that's understood outside of Hastings and Hawke's Bay, let alone inside the community.
Thank you, Councillor Corbyn.
Thank you for that presentation. It was, I learnt a lot, and I'm sure if I saw it again, I'd have a lot more questions to ask, but I do have two. The first one is, given the labour situation, what prospect is there for mechanisation, and has resource into mechanisation been increased over the last 12 months? That's one question.
Yeah, look, and over the last 10 years, we've moved, and especially in pack houses where it's more easy, we have defect sorters which are removed all the graders. So for a normal sized pack house, about 40 people are removed out of the pack house from grading, but they've all been shifted down the other end of the pack house, and it's increased productivity. So productivity's grown immensely through automation, but it doesn't mean we've actually done without any less workers. We've probably got more in the pack house. We've got robotic stackers, palletizers, robotic forklifts for the first time last year at the Taylor Court pack house, which shift all the pallets around automatically without any humans driving them. They know what to do. So the pack house has had a huge amount of capital investment, hundreds of millions of dollars. The orchards are more challenging, but what we've been doing there is putting robot-ready 2D architecture in the orchards at scale. So there's, I would guess, and we're going to do some work on this before the project or program in terms of our strategy around transformation. We're going to do some survey work to find out how much we've invested. But a 2D orchard essentially means you have a plane of fruit, and any robot can see them much more easier. That technology is a long way down the track. What we're doing as an interim step is more augmentation. So it's putting in platforms which allow people to not to have to climb a ladder, not to have picking buckets on, so there's a much lower loading on the worker, and they're able to, and more people can, and more diverse workforce can come in and pick on those platforms, and they go down the 2D rows in the interim. We've tested with abundant robotics. We had that picker out here with a couple of years ago, and we're certainly looking globally for this, but picking is more than just a New Zealand challenge. It's a global challenge in the fruit industry, and we're keeping an eye on that. We think that's probably well into the 2030s before we'll have any scale around the picking. The picking will always be the problem for the next wee while. We could easily turn the lights out in the pack house within the next few years.
Thank you. I saw some of those platforms earlier this week, and I thought that's a good move.
150,000 each, so you need a few of them, but there's certainly a lot of them around.
The next question is the 50% growth in Hawke's Bay and the pressure on fertile land and water. How do those two match up? Is it going to be on more marginal land, the orchards be on more marginal land and less productivity, or do you think you'll be able to maintain the level of productivity with what's available in land and water?
The productivity, I think, won't be the issue. I think we're seeing a lot of new growth around Ruataniwha and Wairoa, and even investment in Bayview. Murray businesses are really getting into that. The Tātou Tautau developments, there's Ngāti Parawira doing it north of here. There's a lot happening in the space in areas which aren't traditional. I think not just apples, but I think horticulture will transform Wairoa over the next few years if we can mitigate some of these challenges that we've got around some of these other constraints. So I think there's land there in our area. Additionally, in terms of, I think some of the stuff which I mentioned around some of the global expectations of sustainability within the supply chain, especially in the environmental sense, will not only force us, will show it means we have to demonstrate transparently that we're going to be meeting nutrient targets, very low nitrogen, phosphorus. Water effectiveness and efficiency is going to come under the microscope already with our farm environment plans. Apples and intensive horticulture with perennial tree crops is very accurate in terms of placing resources where it's of best benefit, and I think we'll find with some land use changes that we're probably going to be better off in terms of some of the water use through that accuracy.
Thank you. Councillor Ollie.
Thank you, Chair. It's very difficult for me to detach my emotions, especially when my homeland of Samoa was mentioned. So just want to explain the narrative of where my question's coming from. I was raised in the orchards. My parents were apple pickers since we arrived here in 1980 something. I've worked in the orchards since I was young, right up until my teen years. So my question is, are your apple pickers paid hourly or per bin? I've got a few questions. Sorry, that's the first one.
Look, as an industry, I don't run a business.
Okay.
But
do you know?
Overwhelmingly, it will be per bin.
Yeah. So how much is a bin at the moment?
Sorry, I can get back to you on it. I know it's 90% more than last year. I think it's about over $45, $47 a bin at the moment. Might be. I'd have to recheck that, but it's getting right up towards 50.
Well, thank you. My next question: do your orchard owners or employers provide safety equipment for the workers to protect them from the elements?
Yeah, they have to provide them with anything they need in terms of PPE, personal protection equipment. Yeah.
Cool. Second to last question: do your workers need to obtain a license to operate the hydro ladder and the tractor?
They have to. It could be sent as a license. I don't think it's what we call a regulatory license, but they have to go through courses and have competency checked off to allow them to use any of that sort of machinery. And tractors, forklifts, everything has to have you need a forklift license, but competency for using any equipment is compulsory.
Cool, thank you. Just one last question. Do you think there's a bit of favouritism towards the RSC scheme and workers versus the local workers who live here and work as apple pickers and tractor drivers?
No, it's a balance there in that we need New Zealand workers to be introduced and often in the seasonal jobs. I started as a seasonal worker, coming from university in Christchurch, and tractor drove on an orchard in Twyford. And then the company that owned that said, actually, we need some good people. We're a bit short. Would you stay? That's how almost so many of our permanent workers start, the New Zealanders, and that's really critical to provide a really good pathway for those people. The RSE comes in for that short length of time and just supports all those roles. And there has to be a balance. And we've always, working with Annie Aranui previously, we always constructed a tension there that you had to work hard to get a lot of New Zealanders to be allowed to have those RSE. And that was always seen as a fear to work with MSD to say, well, you have to be engaging very, very closely with New Zealanders. And then that means you may earn the right then to go out and employ from Pacific.
Cool. Thank you for answering questions. I just want to, I'd feel bad if I didn't let you know one of the situations that my close friend is going through. He's been working for Johnny Appleseed for, I think, over 10 years, and he's been asking for a promotion. And he sees a lot of people who come in from the RSC scheme, or they've been granted the promotion before he has, and he just felt that he's been unfairly treated, or
Excuse
the
me,
opportunities.
Councillor Ollie, could I suggest perhaps that you
Yeah, that's
take
fine. I
that
just wanted to let
outside
you
at
know.
the end of the meeting? Yeah,
Just the treatment
Yeah, no,
of
that would
Pacifica
be-
people here in
because
Hawke's
that's
Bay.
a bit personal.
Cool.
Yep,
Thank you.
Happy to take that offline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Redstone.
Thank you for your report, Gary. I'd just like to move the recommendations.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kerr. I'm going to put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, can I just make a comment, please?
Yes.
Just directly to Gary, thank you for what you do. Representing local on the national stage and national on the international stage. I think we're very, very fortunate to have people like you representing us and understanding that you started in the industry, like many, picking apples. So thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Thanks very much.
So Councillor Ollie, do you want to just slip outside? Oh, no? Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll now invite Aaron to talk to his paper from page 11.
That's just as long as that's not someone else.
Yep.
Thank you. Right, Aaron's ready to start his presentation. Thank you, councillors.
Good afternoon. This quarter three financial result is largely a continuation of the result that we had for the December quarter, in terms of the fact that it's more of the same, really. Is that not going? Just use this. Next. Not sure why that's. Sorry, just a little bit of a technical glitch. Now that's better. We're away. Thank you very much. Basically, what we have is a $11.4 million favourable result for the year to date for the third quarter. Pretty much driven by the operating revenue as per the last quarter as well. $9.5 million, $9.6 million favourable, and an underspend in the expenditure to budget as well. Just going through those revenue lines that actually have contributed to that $9.6 million favourability. The big driver is the $7.7 million that we've received for the government funding for the three waters. And in addition to that, we of course have had the Splash Planet season come into the figures for this last quarter. That was $839K favourable over budget for revenue, so it was a really outstanding result for Splash Planet. Landfill, of course, are still tracking away with their really high volumes. That's a good and a bad thing in the sense that, of course, we're using more of the landfill up faster when we've got more revenue than budget. But that is $1.34 million favourable. Offsetting that, building consent revenues are down by $493K. However, that is subsequently offset by the lower expenditure spend on the spend side. So the net operations number for that building consent area is still favourable. And basically constraints and resources on both sides are contributing to that favourability. DCs are also under a budget by 1.2 million. They can be really, really lumpy, that DCs. We never know when they're actually going to go and when they're not, in terms of accuracy of budgeting. So you tend to get a little bit of lumpiness as to when they're actually, some of those developments go ahead. In terms of expenditure, $1.9 million favourable for the third quarter, pretty much driven by a couple of things. One is $1.2 million of that is due to finance cost savings. Obviously, that's driven by the fact that we've received actual cash from the government, which has slowed our borrowing down. And in addition, well, we've got a strong capital program. We are still behind where we thought we would be in capital, so therefore that affects the overall cost of borrowing as well. Other operating expenditure is $870K favourable, pretty much driven by the fact that when we do capital spend, quite often we use operational expenditure such as personnel and other operating contracting costs. They then need to be recharged into the capital actual project that it is being used for, so we can capitalise it in an accounting sense. And that has created that favourability this quarter. In terms of the whole of capital, council capital spend, we've $59.8 million is the total spend for the 9 months year to date. That's against the budget of, as you can see there, $90 million, which we have set. That was a very challenging a total, and included $30 million of carry forwards from the prior year, and a number of additional projects that were government funded as well. What we've done in this quarter here is just popped up in there the forecast number that we're looking at, we believe that we'll spend for this year in terms of capital, which is around that $94 million mark. And just to give you an idea of where we're looking at ending up there. In addition, we've got carry forwards sitting at around requested for next year of around $46 million. So that presents its own challenges in terms of the fact that we've already got a capital budget for next year. So we're just needing to...
Can I just add something to that, Aaron? So I think the interesting thing with that is that our annual planned capital budget was about $100 million. we had carry forwards from a prior year, and we had additional capital expenditure put in at the last minute due to funding received from central government. So I think we're sort of seeing this trend as we're actually delivering on what would have been the annual plan capital budget. It's just the extra layer that we have across that, which is it's the carry forwards and the additionality, of course, from central government. But $94 million sort of forecast is still significantly more than this council has ever delivered in the past.
Yes, and that shows on that graph with the two trend lines there, which are the two previous years. So you can see it's well above those.
But it would be remiss of us not to say, notwithstanding all of that, with the potential, sort of $50 million carry forward plus what's in the capital budget for next year, there is a lot of work that's going on that will come back to council that's really, I think, starting to move this more away from focusing on an annual capital work program and more looking at a 3-year capital sort of work program, because the reality is, whilst it will be a record capital year if we do hit forecast at 94 million, I mean, we consistently over the last few years with big capital investments from this council, like in the water infrastructure space, we're sort of mid-70s, $80 million has been a consistent sort of capital delivery program.
Just moving through to the forecast, we gave you a forecast last time, and officers have updated that forecast in conjunction with the budget managers, just to give us a clearer view of what that will look like. Basically, what you see here is the green columns are the split, because when you have the rating result, some of it's ring fence, which is the targeted side, and some of it's general rate, which means it can be spent for other things. What you can see there is on the whole of council before interest, we've got a variance in the grey there of $27,000. That's a really fine or a narrow result when you look at, but quite an accurate result when you look at the fact that we're on $81.5 million budget there. So it's pretty much forecasting that we're coming fairly smack on. The other thing there is that there have been some additional impacts, as I mentioned last time, which are approved but not budgeted, and we haven't necessarily released all of the contingency yet for some of those areas, thinking of the Heratonga House shift and that sort of thing. We're just holding that to see how the year end really does wind out. When you add the rate requirements, the rate revenue and the interest additional on that, you wind up with around $2 million overall of rating surplus. Of that, $1.06 million is to do with the general rate, 987,000 is ring fenced in terms of the targeted rate. It's just providing a little bit of an update as to where we're sitting. Now, I just wanted to add this slide in because a bit of advertisement really. We put in advertisement. We put a 5th page in there for you. I've taken out the comments for this particular thing so I can actually just show the balls. But obviously we've put a 5th page in there to give you a little bit more granularity around some of the cost centres of interest. And what we can do is we can change those as focuses change and things like that. But it just gives you a bit of an idea and some commentary at a slightly lower level as to what's happening with some of those. So this is really just saying, have a look at that page. I'm sure you have, and that will be something that's going forward in there. The only other thing I would just temper that with is just to remember that a cost centre is very much an island on its own, and groups have multiple cost centres, and sometimes there's some things that offset others in different cost centres. Where that is happening, of course, we would always make that comment and note that as well, just for your benefit. So you're just not seeing it in too much of an isolation. So that's just for any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Sholin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, and just coming back to carry forwards, I fully endorse and support the concept of looking at a 3-year projection. It's concerned me for some time looking at an annual basis only, particularly because carry forwards seem to be increasing year on year. May I please also request that as you're working on that, we really do need, from a governance perspective, feedback from you, Chief, on when it becomes time for us to just focus on those carry forwards and stop adding to the plan, clear the backlog, so to speak, and then carry forward. Because I can certainly see how we've ended up where we are. We're almost victims of our own success in terms of government funding we've received, but also the delivery timeframes that come along with that. So I'm keen to make sure that we don't overtax council resources, people in particular.
Yeah, thank you. And I think we'll look to bring a 3-year view post the adoption of the LTP, because I think the other opportunity around a sort of longer view of capital expenditure, but I think also a more regular sort of check-in against that plan allows us to give advice to governors that sort of say, look, some things that might be dependent on land acquisition or consenting processes, things that blow out, might mean that things that are in the 3-year plan you can bring forward. So I think there's opportunities for us to, whilst we've been, I think, delivering a consistently good level of capital spend, just be really challenging ourselves to, can we more actively manage this by having a bit more of a strategic view, and then more regularly sort of looking at our capital work program over that time horizon and being able to give choices around what we might bring forward from out years of something slowing down in this particular year.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we've had a really good run over recent years with advantageous interest rates declining against budget and all the rest of it. And I think our debt is currently 150, and we've got about 30 million forward borrowing, if I remember rightly.
We've got 185 million and $30 million worth.
Yeah, and $30 million. Yeah. There's some hints from overseas, particularly the US, that interest rates might start to creeping up again shortly because inflation is tending to move up as well. At which point, looking ahead, might we expect that to come through and start having an impact on our debt servicing costs?
You want to?
Timely comment, Councillor. We just had a meeting immediately prior to this with our Treasury advisors, and we're having that exact conversation.
Yeah.
So there is, yes, you're right. There is, if we're looking at some of our swap instruments that we've got available and fixing of interest rates, they have sort of, the curve has changed direction. So we're seeing that already to a point. The floating rates are still very low, which is a good proportion of our debt now. So we're still creating the benefit from those floating rates. The Reserve Bank has indicated that the OCR is not going to be increasing until 2024.
Yeah.
24. So just despite inflationary pressures, and we are looking at pre-funding some maturing debt for next year, and pre-funding some of our capital program that we've got coming forward, and looking at how we can do that. And one of probably the more logical options at this point in time is to fix some of that debt directly through the LGFA. So we are actively monitoring that and working with our Treasury advisors to see what the best way forward is.
I'll just supplement that with another same question, but slightly differently. How much would the official cash rate have to increase by before it started to worry us?
Okay, yeah. What's interesting is that currently, of course, the I think part of the rates that we were looking at this morning was borrowing at around 1.57% on the spot market. That is still grossly well below where we have been in 2014-15, when we were looking at swaps and having borrowed at 5.9%. We're now looking at saying, actually, let's just fix this and cover it like that at 1.5. We've ridden the elevator the whole way down and taken enormous gains out of the market by saving in the version of saving. Basically now what we're saying, if we lock it even if it's a slight amount higher, it's still a huge advantage. The other thing Bancorp are saying at the moment is that every single Reserve Bank comment in all of the countries are saying that they're viewing at this point that the inflation rate is transitory and will last around a year, and then they're not sure. So they're not saying this is a hard locked and structural inflation rate increase that's going to stay a long time. At this point, the Reserve Bank's view is that it's just going to be transitory.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barber.
Kia ora. So in terms of our swimming pools, our community swimming pools, you know, we've kind of, I mean, like the summer is probably the hottest summer that we've had for a long time, so Splash Planet's through the roof, but, you know, you've identified Frimley and Havelock pools as, I guess, loss leaders in it. But this includes Clive and Flaxmere Indoors, But those two especially, I mean, I went to the Havelock pools and it was pretty quiet for that time of the year.
Lower admission rate.
Yeah. So what's our, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is, are we looking, what are we looking to do with some of those pools? Because they've been losing admissions for a long time now.
Yeah, I think a combination of that and some impact on our Learn to Swim programs over, you know, lockdown periods and what have you. I mean, the short answer, Baden, is the work that we're currently doing, which is the strategic review of aquatics that also has to factor in, whilst, you know, Jock's earlier presentation, you know, a $40 million Olympic swimming pool that's not too far away, we are going to need to stand back and strategically look at our aquatic offerings and sort of programs to be able to make informed choices.
Three.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
So just another impact through your chair is as you saw with Jock's presentation as well, the impact of canoe polo, and that facility and what that's done to particularly Flaxmere and Clive pools as well.
Thank you. Councillor Corbyn.
I'm looking at the pools cost centre and the unfavourable 206,000, I think it is, isn't it? How much of that is from Learn to Swim revenue, and how much of it is from people turning up to the pools for a swim? And the reason I'm asking is, long term, is that going to be a trend with the new pool at the sports park going in, and where people will go for Learn to Swim?
Yes, potentially, that we're going to have to work through, and I think some of this goes to, and this is some of the early conversations that are going on around shaping up the aquatics review, understanding what the offering is going to be at the new swimming pool, and some of this is going to get down to things like price points. So, you know, if it costs $110 per child per month to be a member of the Red Devils swim squads currently, what happens with the swimming pool, the new swimming pool, and understanding their business case, a lot of it will get down to, well, you know, what's those costs going to sort of be, and understanding the offerings and the price points is part of what I think's in front of us. I mean, we've heard Sir Graham say previously that you know, Olympic swimming pool is all just going to be additionality because there's all of this latent, you know, demand. We're going to have to come to a view on some of that over the next period of time.
Yeah. So is that analysis underway at the moment?
Yeah. So we've got the sort of aquatic review going. The front end of it is coming through great communities, and will come up through strategy and policy.
And thank you. I'm pleased you found the dashboards and reporting on some of those new cost centres useful. What we're actually saying is we're quite receptive if through your committees, if through your work, you have a curiosity about spending in a particular area, then we're really receptive to you making a suggestion, and that dashboard can figure in the next meeting. Yeah, so, yeah. Are you moving the recommendation? Thank you. And a second to thank you, Councillor Lawson. I'm going to put that recommendation from page 11. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thanks, Aaron. And moving on to item 7, Mr. Allen. Yeah.
I'll start if I can through you, Chair, before hand over to Mr. Allen. I suppose I just want to reflect as the Chief, and look, there'll be a little bleeding between, the quarter ending the 31st of March and some things that have happened beyond then. But we had our all-staff sessions yesterday, and part of what, we were kind of reflecting on is, now I'm being unabashed cheerleader here for Hastings and the organisation this year, is just the level of awesomeness that's going on. So it is worth reflecting on some of our big pillars. When you think about infrastructure, we're well into constructing our small communities. We're building Frimley. We've started Waiaroha on infrastructure more broadly. Cape View Corner, is underway. The Waipatu works is coming to completion. We're about to open the Mad Mile. In our CBD, the Quest is underway. The Queen Street streetscape upgrades have finished. The municipal's going. Landmark Square, which is Project 10 of 23 of our CBD revitalisations happened. In the event space, the awesome 660 concerts, national track and fields, national pipe band sort of championships, the things that we've talked about for a while about, positioning Hastings on the national stage, the emergence now of it's the hip place to be, and the renaissance and the re-emergence of Hastings. I think in the housing space, if we just reflect on 2021, we've adopted our long-term housing strategy. The government's publicly committed to announcing it. We've hosted the National Multi-Housing Conference. We're building record levels of houses. We've opened Tarbert Street. We're advancing the rest of our Flaxmere land holdings. I can't, notwithstanding, yes, some pressures, and we don't always get it right, but I just think there's a level of awesomeness that I want to, kind of actually celebrate around what's going on in Hastings. And again, I think working through, what is a pretty comprehensive integrated report that we continue to try and evolve. We're happy to take, any questions, but I just think when we think about, the broad things that we're trying to affect for Hastings on so many fronts, we've got some pretty awesome things going on, and I think that's something collectively we can be pretty proud of around the governance table, and I'm certainly incredibly proud of as the Chief Executive.
Mr. Allen.
I haven't really got much more to say. I think,
Mr. Allen has morphed into a social studies teacher, and he's about to show us some of his visual displays.
Well, I was going to, and the last thing I was going to say, but if you're going to do this, the reflection of, obviously, the breaking news from last week was some of that recognised in the housing space with the Government Collaboration Award at the Taituara conference, which is awesome because it's about Hastings, and the council can be proud, but it's our partners, the Tai Whenua, the iwi, our government agency partners. But again, we were reflecting on yesterday, that's just the latest recognition of Hastings. The events leader of the year in New Zealand is Megan. The emerging risk professional is Regan. The 4 international, flag green flag parks that we have here, that Flaxmere is the most active park in New Zealand. We are the most beautiful large town. We are the supreme New Zealand, Keep New Zealand Beautiful award winners. There is seriously a level of awesomeness going on. So yeah, I'm as you can tell pretty proud of the staff because it's been a lot going on.
Yep.
So, Madam Chair, we've this is, I think, the 4th edition of our ops and monitoring quarterly report, and I think the staff are doing a great job in developing that with your feedback as well over that time. So, it is a comprehensive report. It is now 100 pages long, and I know there's lots of information in there for you to digest. So I'm assuming that we'll take the report as read, but just to sort of work through, I guess, a few of the highlights. And what I'll do, Madam Chair, is just take this through the 6 pillars of the LTP, and on each pillar we can possibly pause and see if there's any questions on that issue before we move on. And I thought I'd present it in a slightly different way. So our environment priority area, there's a lot going on in this space with the implementation of the drinking water upgrades. You've heard from Graham and the team this morning about Waiaraha and where that's going, and the Frimley upgrades as well. We've got increased volumes going through the landfill, like Aaron mentioned, driven by a number of reasons. A lot of it's because of how the economy's going as well. Our refuse and recycling team have done a fantastic job of embedding the change that was made last year, and there's some good statistics in the report on how that's progressing over the last quarter. This work continues in the coastal area as well, and most recently the east, the Cape View corner, and not to be confused with the work and the discussions that have been having with the protection of the H18, the houses on the front of Hamawana as well. So that continues. So there's extra information in the report. There's some additional information in the report about Lowe's Pit, which Craig can talk to if required. And really happy to take if there's any questions on this area, Madam Chair.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to reiterate and clarify, just in terms of the Cape View corner, unfortunately the media sort of took a little bit of the not quite correct implementation of that corner. So just to remind you all, the work that Council is directly investing in is around the protection of the corner itself to protect public assets that are at risk of erosion over the next potentially over the next 20 to 30 years. The work we are doing will not directly protect those H18 properties. Council staff through Mr Hanson is working through the H18 properties with their specific solution, and that work is still ongoing. So just wanted to clarify that potential misrepresentation of our piece of work on the corner there.
Time for the next cloud.
So moving around, this a lot of investment goes into this area within our network, our roading network, and a lot of it just goes ahead without much fanfare. Lots of work through Chris Jang and his team with the network upgrades. There are projects that are more higher profile, like the Jocks to the Head of Taonga, and the work that's been happening along State Highway 51 and by Patu. There are some growth projects underway at the moment as well, along the Mahu Road and Irongate, and the walking and cycling upgrades continue as well, as do the upgrades to the bridges, and the one probably the most profile one at the moment is the Kuraponga Bridge as well. So, Craig, in that area?
Probably just key on the Kuraponga, which is a key link through to our regional partner in Middle and North Island. We're hoping to release very shortly a date that the road will be opening, and it is looking to be well ahead of schedule. Yep. Possibly, yes, it probably is.
Mayor Hazelhurst.
Oh, kia ora, and acknowledge your awesomeness and the presentation. And congratulations to the team and a fabulous report. Just a couple of questions from me. As I've just come down from Three Waters Local Government New Zealand and all the mayors of New Zealand, understanding first and foremost, can we turn to the Lowe's Pit page 16, and thank you for the work package and timelines. In terms of construction and going from detailed design into construction and completion, can you just give us a heads up what happens after November 2021 and how long that piece of detailed design would take? And I've just got a couple of other questions as well, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Hugh.
Sorry, I'm not all over all of the detail in this one, but I do know, coming out of a discussion just yesterday We're about to go to tender or to directly engage, just depending on our procurement rationale, to buy the first stage of the key infrastructure, which is our first flush system. So that's the devices that when it rains, the initial runoff runs into the wastewater system. And there was detailed meeting between Mr. Cave, Mr. Chapman, and the two consultants, Tonkin and Taylor and SCO, working through that. The second stage is end of pipe, and there are ongoing conversations in terms of filling the pit in with the vertical drainage structure. We're not calling it wetlands because that has all sorts of connotations in the new national and regional policy statements. But before we can fill the pit in, we've got to work through all those discussions around existing consent status to the likes that some of the landowners have to take water from the pit. So they're working through. It won't happen as one go, so there will be actually pieces of infrastructure installed very, very shortly as a first stage and a second, and I'll get you an update. I haven't had a catch up since the Zoom meeting that was happening yesterday.
Great, thank you. My second question is just in terms of the increase in tonnages around commercial waste at landfill, which is it's another 10,000. It's versus the 57 versus 47 last year. Are we considering any national work being done to see how we can manage? I mean, this is going to be ongoing, increasing, filling our landfill for the next 10 years with this massive construction pipeline we've got in front of us. How are we going to work with, I mean, municipal is one thing and educating children is one thing, but where does our main waste come from? It comes from the commercial sector. So I just wonder what work has been done both nationally and locally to address this huge increase?
Can't answer that in a simple, because it's lots and lots of things. And just yesterday, Ms. Atkins gave an update to the Eco District Subcommittee around all of the initiatives that are both playing out nationally. She also highlighted some of the risks to some of the national policy settings that MFA are doing with the strong lobbying going on from factions of this community who do well out of the current system. And she also talked about, obviously, you're correct, we've been doing the work on the municipal side and the recycling and in the education, but also the work that needs to be moved on with as we start gathering more data to diagnose what's exactly going on that commercial side, because there is a number of different veins to that. And in particular, as part of the WMP, a lot of focus on redirecting processables, which is the items that go into the landfill that generate the methane gas and the carbon dioxide gas. A big part of removing processables was getting rid of garden waste out of the residential waste stream, but then it's also moving across to the processables out of the construction sector, but then also direct discussions with some of the larger processing facilities across Hawke's Bay that's seen quite a lot of food waste and wet waste to there. So that piece of work is what's moving forward, and what we can do is I can get Angela just to flick through just a short bulleted list from that presentation she gave just yesterday. It was. Probably the other one that we are working on is we've had an increase in product. It has eased off over the last couple of weeks, but we've had an increase in product and particularly around pelts when they were banned from going to BioRich. That is causing us some significant operational issues, and we're looking at some measures to potentially take, and once we firm those up, we'll share those with councillors before potentially implementing them.
Thank you. Just my last question is on cemeteries. Through you, Chair, can I just ask about Mangaroa and maintenance and operational expenditure? The extension plans, have we got budget? So we're looking at in the current budget. So in the LTP, will we be developing those plans for Mangaroa extension? Or is that happening in this budget?
So there is money in this financial and next financial year for the development works, and that development work is actually underway. So Top Line Construction won the tender to build a number of the concrete plinths. the design work for replacing the toilet and creating storage and some facilities for the staff while they're actually working out there. Because as we move forward, that will be the main location. More often that staff will be located there. And I've just ordered the new columbariums for the ash interns. So that work is currently underway. We're just doing some further options as it moves through.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen again.
So with our economy, and in the report this time, we've sort of included the Hastings at a glance, sort of an on-the-ground pulse of what's going on across a number of our different sectors. And you heard from Gary Jones just before, a deep dive into that sector and how that's all performing and the issues that they have. But obviously, this year, it's remiss not to reference our economy without COVID-19 and the drought, and last year's drought and this year's drought as well, ongoing, and the impact that that's having on our rural sector. I think one issue just to pick up on, and it's becoming more and more prevalent in recent times, is certainly is how our hospitality sector is struggling, and particularly for labour and support. So we're, in our space and the areas that we're seeing, obviously the housing market is going gangbusters, and construction generally, investment in our industrial land areas with, as I mentioned, under the moving around section, with roundabouts in Aonamahu Road and for Irongate Industrial Subdivision as well.
Councillor Sholem.
Thank you. Two comments, if I might. The first one, just a little bit of feedback. First and foremost, thank you so much for this ongoing compilation of everything that's going on. It's been a really valuable resource, and it seems to get better time on time, so I do want to acknowledge the amount of work that goes into that. Little bit of just, I guess, admin feedback. Our economy section I found really hard to read. It's very pixelated. If for the next one we could look at that, that would be great. Really valuable information in there that I could glean out of it. And the other thing I just wanted to go back and acknowledge was the survey that's been done by the waste team in terms of our new recycling and rubbish system. What fantastic feedback to have. I really want to take a moment to acknowledge that. This was a huge systemic change, and the education that was required in that has obviously been really successful. I did note within the feedback, and it's something that seems to keep coming up, is around recycling on windy days. I do see my neighbours stacking their crates and trying to do everything they can to be proactive about keeping their recycling in their bins and not have it blowing down the street. But I just wondered if we're doing any work in that area.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, we're up to version 1.0.3 of potential little flexi nets that can go over the top. So we're just in early trials of that. Just step into it carefully so it doesn't create bigger operational issues in terms of actually the service itself. So we are trialling things.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you. Just a follow-up on the curbside services. And the graphics are helpful, but I'm just trying to compare to where we would have been pre-wheelie bins, and have all of the things that we were looking to improve and enhance upon. Are those actually coming to fruition or not?
So through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, I haven't got that in the top of my head, so I'd have to just speak to Angela to pull that through.
So I think that's it's great to report on, currently where we sit, but if we haven't got a comparison on some of these things, then it's not as helpful. We can't actually get a guide to where things are tracking, especially, that was quite a big issue at the time to convert to wheelie bins.
Yeah, so why don't we provide some information offline, but for the next report, actually do that reporting against the objectives that we had.
So, yeah, that's good timing, because it'll be around a year in as well. So we're timing it. Probably enough said already on this category about where we live. But if there's any questions on any of the information that was in the report, sort of a bit more focus has gone to this area in the report as well, around providing a bit more information about what's happening and where.
Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chair. Also, I'd like to congratulate the team on this awesomeness. This is a fantastic report and I really enjoyed reading it. I mean, it's rather large, but actually it was really, really interesting to see what's been worked on, what's currently being worked on and what's ahead of us. So it was really a great report, so thank you. My question really is just around the housing strategies, and I know it's a very comprehensive strategy and that we are moving at pace, but I just noticed that there's a few project manager appointments to be made, and I'm just wondering how that is going and where we're at with that. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair, so the executive at the moment are just going through planning and delivery process around each of our strategic areas of focus in the LTP and Council's priorities. I'm most fortunate to be the senior officer responsible for the housing strategy, so very pleased you asked this question. So we'll have PMs in space for all the project lines. Most of them are in-house, and I think we'll be making 3 external appointments just to give us that additionality we need in a couple of areas. So.
Just the one thing I'd add to that, if I can, through you, Chair, is there's a pretty dynamic space, and whilst we've got our housing strategy, we're going to have to stay really agile as opportunities come up. So, for example, the government's budget, is next Thursday, and we'll be watching that with interest. We know that housing is going to be a big focus. We know that the government's already made some fairly significant announcements, like a $4 billion infrastructure fund. We'd be very surprised if there isn't some strong element on multi-housing. So I just think, in the strategy space, as whilst we had a strategy we adopted earlier in the year, we're just going to have to stay pretty live and agile too, because I think opportunities are going to come, along. But that's just the normal part of, working with you and through the right governance structures to kind of adjust as we go.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, too. The way we're setting up the delivery management of the strategic focus lines, as well as our internal reporting processes, so that the management can track how we're going, what we call RAG reporting, red, orange, green, as to how we're going. We'll be structuring that reporting internally such that it's easy to translate it into the ops and monitoring report. So the governance at an appropriate level for governance can be assured that things are either tracking, and where they're going off track, that the management's actively doing what it can to bring it back on track. But we probably won't be ready for that level of reporting at least till the next ops and monitoring report.
So in the things to do category, it's, Aaron's already touched on the fantastic summer season that Splash Planet had. We're very keen to look at it from a financial sense, but just what that reflected around the people that were in the district enjoying Hawke's Bay over the summer, sort of played through in Splash Planet's numbers. It's sort of easy to forget that only a few months ago we were at level 2 with COVID as well, and that did have an impact on a couple of our facilities, namely Toi Toi. We had to have a number of events postponed or cancelled, and it does play through into our Learn to Swim areas as well for our swimming pools. Swimming pools also. And we do need to do some more work, and it'll be part of the strategic review that happens, sort of really understanding, the impact of canoe polo facility now being at the sports park, what that means for our revenue and use at the aquatics facilities. and how that will look in the future with the new swimming complex as well. There's some good information in the report from our libraries team around the activities that are going on and innovations that are playing out as well. So, any questions on that?
Councillor Kerr.
I'm not sure if you're able to answer this, Mr. Allen, but I was fascinated to read under Hastings District Libraries the availability of skinny jump modems. And how would our families learn about it? Who helps fund it? I just was interested in a little bit more. And if you're unable to answer, it'd just be great to have a brief, maybe an email from somebody to us all about it, please.
You're right. I can't answer that question, so I'll get Rebecca to follow up and answer that and bring that back to you. But my guess would be that the funding has come through the internet provider Skinny as the start of the team.
It seems as such a great program.
Thank you. Councillor Barber.
I just got apologies, I've got to do a school pickup. Thanks.
Thank you. Apology accepted. Mayor Hazelhurst.
Thank you. Really just have a question around the revenue from Splash and how we will be allocating that $1 million. And does that all go back into Splash for maintenance and ops?
It's entirely your decision. At year end, we'll bring that back to you in the context of the overall sort of rating position, and you will have that decision to make as to how those funds are allocated, or how the overall surplus of council is then allocated. Whether you want to apportion some of that directly back to Splash Planet, given that's where some of that came from, or look at other initiatives. But we'll bring that back to you. That decision is normally around September.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the library closures next week, and can someone just explain to me about this hardware installation?
Perfect timing, Rebecca.
Oh, welcome. And how are we managing that? Yeah, cool.
Through you, the Chair. So the installation is they need to cut up some concrete to put in special cabling. So it's a new system that allows the automation of check-in and check-out of books. And unfortunately, because of the entrances to the libraries, they do actually need to shut to be able to cut the concrete and get that all installed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon.
Yeah, just picking up on Mayor Hazelhurst's question on Splash, I thought we used to have a policy that if Splash produced a surplus, that we would allocate some or all of that money into capital development. Is that a firm policy? Does it still exist? Where do we stand on it?
Yes, you're correct, Councillor. That is whether it's a policy, but it's certainly been a practice of council for a number of years. We haven't done it the last 2 years because council hasn't had sufficient rating surplus to allocate to that. Because it is premised on if Splash Planet has a financial result that's significant, that's better than budget, and if council overall is in a strong financial position to be able to allocate sufficient rating funds, then we've allocated up to $100,000 into a capital reserve for Splash Planet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sholin.
If I might just go back to the question that Mayor Hazelhurst raised around the library, I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the huge amount of work that's being done in the libraries at the moment. For those who may not be aware, the new system that's being put in place will ultimately allow our library staff to be much more hands-on with people's needs within the library rather than checking in and out books. And also they're currently going through a process to re-tag 220,000+ items, which is a huge undertaking, and I just really want to acknowledge the amazing work they're doing. I pop in there regularly and they're fantastic.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at page 58, the Splash Planet Aquatics report. Earlier we saw that the village pool had a reduction in income. But what we've got is the numbers are over 6,000 up on the previous year. And when we go back to the Frimley pool, their numbers are up over 1,000 on the previous year. So what's happened in that space? So there's been a decrease in income.
Through your chair, I don't think it's necessarily a decrease in income, but it's a variance to budget is what's being referred to, as opposed to a decline in revenue from prior years. So I think that one of the things that we need to look at, and this is sort of really highlighting that, is the budgets that we've set for revenue in those areas as well. We need to have a bit of a review of that.
Thank you, because it was made to be seen that the numbers were going down and dropping and the facilities weren't being used, when it's pretty obvious they are being used. Thank you.
Thank you. No, we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
Can't forget about our people, councillor. And it's good timing for Rebecca to arrive in the room with the Eastern categories we're going through now. But there's a good update in the report around the mahi for youth and the work that's going on, particularly in our community with our community plans. And you're all out at Camberley recently for the adoption of that plan. But interesting reading that report. There's lots of other work going on with lots of communities around their community plan aspirations as well. So, Rebecca, anything else you want to highlight in that area?
Oh no, I'll take it as read and obviously happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Sholem.
Thank you, Chair. Keen again to acknowledge the huge amount of work done in this particular area. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention again how fantastic the Youth Council is this year. Proactively making submissions on all of the things as I understand it. However, I did just also want to raise in front of full council, we do have a couple of youth councillors that are having some trouble getting to meetings with financial burden. I just wonder if that's something we can have a look at.
Yes, through you, the Chair, I understand, that we've had an inquiry as to that, and the youth team are currently working with the Mayor, I believe, on that.
Okay, great. Could I stay informed because I've lodged that request a number of days ago, and it's good for me to know as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Just a very little one. The Te Pōhui community plan hasn't yet been signed off because I understand we're still waiting for Mangahururu Tangatu to write the history. The community's actually getting on and getting the job done, but it would be lovely to wrap that up and get the document in front of council, even if there's a page missing that we add in at a later stage. The community's looking for that endorsement from council, the ability to come and stand in front and be proud and own their community plan. Please.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. How many, just in the senior housing part, how many of our senior houses currently comply with the Residential Tenancy Act?
I think with the Residential Tenancies Act, not a problem in terms of the new
healthy
homes. I don't know if you can answer that.
Could we please have that at some stage?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, anything else you want to add?
No, so that's the 6 pillars, but I'd be remiss of me not to put something in here about the corporate support that is provided to the organisation as well, which really is driven by a whole lot of fantastic staff and behind the scenes that don't generally get a lot of recognition for the work that they do. But I think just a couple of shout outs amongst all of that. There's some additional information in your report regarding the information management and business transformation work that's going on. There's a number of projects, quite significant projects that are happening throughout the organisation in that space at the moment. There's some information there from our risk and insurance team as well around emerging risks and things that we're seeing and how things are changing. And I think it just in the marketing and comm space and events in particular, over this quarter that we're reporting against, we had 660 in Hastings, which was fantastic in January, but then we had the the opposite of the cancelled Horse of the Year show and the Art Deco weekend as well. I know the events team and the marketing comms team had put a lot of effort, particularly into Art Deco in Hastings, and unfortunately didn't get the chance to reap those benefits as well. And then, in the last quarter, and particularly as we've sort of morphed into the quarter we're now in, lots of community engagement going on at the moment, whether that be in the housing space, with the implementation of our water strategy, our long-term plan, reserve plans, and most recently around Māori wards. Lots of communication and engagement with the community as well. So, any questions on that space?
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
Just a comment. I thought this was really a relevant piece. No, relevant as opposed to irrelevant. A relevant part to understanding what's happening in the background, so thank you for it. And the other bit is earlier today I was talking to Paola about new staff in the call centre that I haven't met, and she said, please, we're all welcome at any time. They would love to see councillors just pop their head in.
Oh, cool.
Because as much as we want to meet them, they would like to meet us in person too. So thank you for this, it's great.
Thank you, Councillor Sholin.
Echoing Councillor Kerr's comments there about the relevance of that section of update. If I may also just flip back to the previous item we were talking about, I noticed consultations we put out, looks like the closing date was January, consultation around the light installations that we've been doing and getting community feedback. How does that get fed back to us, the outcomes of those consultations? So, sorry, page, if it helps, page 87. Under community engagement activities.
We'll follow up. Hopefully the answer is through great communities.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll need to follow up where exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I'm just interested to understand the outcome, so that'll be great.
Thank you, Councillor Redstone.
Just adding a comment to Councillor Kerr's comment. Paola got a high acclaim on Facebook day before yesterday. Lots of compliments about her manner and things at the counter. So yeah, I took her. She's great.
Yes.
Thank you. We have a recommendation on page 28. Could I have a mover, please, and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Lawson. And a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Dixon. I'm going to put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. And we're just going to break now for afternoon tea. Thank you. We will resume. You may recall at our last meeting there was a request to see a video that had been produced, and we did have some difficulties technically with that. And while we have the technician who has got it, we actually have some sound now, so we're going to just rule a line under the last session and before we start the next one. Thank you.
Tuku whakawhētai whakamoemiti atu ki a koe, ai tēnei kaupapa, kua pahere nei tātou tērā te hainatanga mai a te tiriti o Waitangi, ia kaupipiri. No ere pā, ka tōkia mai tō wairua tapu ki Waitangi mā. Tuku whakamaua kia tēnā, tēnā hauki e hui e tāi. E kona. Haere mai, haere mai, haere mai, nau mai rā irugi I tēnei rangi o te tiriti o Waitangi.
O te waka e ko tahingia rai te horo o ngā tangata. Nō reire ngā mea pango. Karanga mai, karanga mai, karanga mai rā.
When we embrace our values and principles of the treaty, we commit to giving every person the opportunity to participate in a brighter future for us all.
As the Mayor of Ahuriri and the Council's Māori portfolio holder, I am absolutely committed to continuing to build on our Council's positive relationship with mana whenua.
It's very fulfilling that we're here today, because the Treaty of Waitangi never sleeps. We pull it out once a year and we talk about it, but actually it lives every month, every week, every day, every hour, every minute. And it's hard work, but we've got to do it. It's uncomfortable, but we've got to work it. It might be even guilt-ridden, but we've got to do it. Otherwise, we're not fulfilling the covenant, the kawenata that our tipuna sign out here.
Councillor Redstone.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for showing that. I'd just like to thank everyone that was involved in that production and in the day itself. Thank you to Naomi for arranging Friendly Productions to do the filming, and we had it re-edited because it needed sound in it. We're sending it out to various entities to make sure we get some good funding next year. But yeah, thank you to everyone involved. It was a really great day and we're looking forward to an even better one next year.
And more to the point, thank you to Councillor Redstone and Councillor Corbyn for their superb organisation behind the scenes, and Councillor O'Keefe also.
And the rest of the Waipariku Waitangi Committee. So Maxine Bogue's also involved. Yeah, Hanari, her partner, Matawai, Timu and Michelle Smith and Howard Maguire. So that's our committee.
No, it was a lovely occasion, so well done everybody involved. Right, moving on to item 8, which is our Lagoima requests. I actually think that's relatively self-explanatory. I don't think anyone needs to speak to that in particular. So we just have 2 recommendations. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Thank you, Councillor Sholem. I'm going to put those recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Now, we have one other item to be part of our general agenda, and that is that's the council submission on to Waka Kotahi on State Highway 50. It's a supplementary report. It's item 9. If you can lay your hands on that. If you have a hard copy, it's in a separate booklet. Item 9. Supplementary. Yeah, it's in a if you have a hard copy, it's a separate document. So, Mr. Thew. Okay. In the meantime, if people have comments. Yeah. I know I did hear some discussion earlier where people were very laudatory of the submission that had been made. And we have 3 people with questions thus far. So, Councillor Hazelhurst, or do you think you need to wait until...
I know this fairly well,
right,
being
okay.
a roading. So look, in summary, I think what it's saying, and it's a fantastic piece of work by Craig and Jag and the team. In summary, it's basically saying, look, on State Highway 5, we're just not convinced that a blanket 80-kilometre speed reduction on 83 kilometres is appropriate. We need all of this to be grounded in a strategic corridor management approach, and that this is blunt, to be blunt. We don't think it's been appropriately thought through. It doesn't follow Waka Kotahi's own internal systems and processes, and I think it needs to be revisited in summary, and that we don't believe the proposal is warranted with sitting in absence of the other set of interventions and investments that should be made on State Highway 5. On State Highway 51, we are strongly noting our community's preference for a reduction from 70 kilometres to 50 kilometres an hour, noting that the technical assessment is 60 kilometres, but the main issue that we have is that the proposal only moves at 150 metres beyond St George's Road. We think that's wrong, and are advocating that whilst it's our community's preference for 50, and whether it's 50 or 60, it needs to go to Ruahapia, to the stream. So that's in essence, and I think a very solid piece of work that's setting out all of the evidence and rationale for the proposal that's being made.
Thank you, Councillor Nixon.
I was particularly impressed with this report. I thought it covered just about everything we've discussed and so on. There's probably just one slight omission, and I don't know whether we get another chance to alter or amend or add to our submission with the extension that's been given. Now, I'm mindful that perhaps the one other alternative road in and out of Hawke's Bay over what used to be the Manawatu Gorge is also in a state of unsatisfactory condition. I just wondered if that maybe could have been added as just another blockage to Hawke's Bay's prosperity for transport of both goods and people, because it means that our two major arteries are severely compromised, particularly the state 50, state 5 if we go to an 80k limit. That's all.
I think, obviously the submission is dealing with the proposals that are on the table, and it's probably more through the regional transport investment plan that we would make that kind of case, I would think. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Kerr.
I'd just really like to say congratulations to the team that wrote this. When I first read it, I immediately thought, oh, we forgot to tell them what the answer was. And then I remembered actually we're criticising them because there's no fact, there's no basis to make, to come up with any answers. It was inspiring to go to the Te Pohui community meeting where there are over 50 people. The golf club was packed out, there were people outside, so there may have been more. Every single one voted against the proposal as it was, and that's been well captured in here. The community aren't against a speed limit reduction, but it's in appropriate places, and they are incredibly fearful, we spoke about it again just on Sunday, that a blanket reduction like this is going to create carnage on the open road part, on the Rangataiki Plains and the Estelle Plains. They can just see that kilometres of vehicles backed up. Somebody's going to burst out and do something stupid. So once again, just congratulations to the team that wrote this. I thought it captured all of the sentiment that had been expressed by so many parties. It was disappointing that NZTA wouldn't come to the community meeting. The community felt really let down by them. And I think that's a lesson for us, that if we're doing major changes, we have to keep doing what we're doing, which is actually working with our community, finding solutions together and being seen out in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sholem.
Thank you. I won't reiterate all the things that Councillor Kerr has already said. The only thing I do want to include, and it's not for addition within the submission, but it's just to note, is how distressing I found it when we had our conversation with the representatives. And it was quite clear that any speed consultation that HDC had already done in selected areas like around State Highway 51 was largely being disregarded, and they were starting again. Frankly, it's offensive to the community who have invested the time and effort to consult with us, and what I would argue is a far more comprehensive way, since we also take the time to identify who different road users are in terms of, are they locals, are they simply passing through, what is their purpose for travel. So a lot of learning can be done there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Outstanding submission. Well done to the team for writing that. I think it's very appropriate and well laid out. My question is, Whakakotahi extension of submission time. What's their motive behind that? Because I believe it's more strategic to get more submissions to support their point of view.
I'm unsure as to the reasons behind Whakakotahi needing to extend the submissions. It was a call that was made on 4:30 on Friday afternoon. As we understand it, thousands of submissions have been made. Encouragingly, I think following the team and Mayor Sandra meeting with the Chief Executive personally on Monday afternoon, I think the concerns that we've raised, which has probably been amplified through a range of submissions, are well noted, and I think that they will be taking their time, and certainly and we appreciated the honest candour of the Chief Executive, who acknowledged that many of the issues, having read our submission already, she could not disagree with. And so I think, if more than anything, it's probably needing to actually take stock of what's a range of legitimate issues that have been raised.
More than happy to move the recommendations. Congratulate the writers.
Thank you. And Councillor Kerr, did you have something to add?
Yeah. The reason that Mayor Sandra and I wanted this brought back to council is to reiterate that this is a councillor and staff submission at the highest level of this council. This is not just a submission from engineering staff, but this is from the whole council. And I think this is really important that the submission that we made is very clearly a public document. Public can read it now and they have time to build their own submissions with information that's in it if they wish. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barber.
Yeah, just in your comments, Tan, about the Te Pohue community meeting, they did say that, what did they say, that they weren't opposed to a speed reduction, but they wanted it in the right places or something?
Yes, so they in particular spoke about the two villages of Te Pohue and Te Haroto, and virtually everybody that I could see, although there wasn't a vote, everybody I could see acknowledged that that was seen as a rural residential area with driveways. They also acknowledged the turning area outside the Tarawera Cafe was dangerous. But there are also parts of the road, in particular long straight passing lanes, that they just couldn't see the logic. And as we all know, the discussion around the mathematics of a 41-second delay has been acknowledged as it was quite simply an error and inappropriate amount of time.
Thank you. We have two recommendations on page 7 and we have had a mover and seconder. I'm going to put those two recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Now, we have a recommendation now to exclude the public. Could I have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor.
So it's a mix of both, some commercial information about contractors, also some matters around some costs associated with the carrying out of our regulatory functions, and the naming of some of those parties are the reasons why it's in PX, is proposed to be in PX.
Thank you. So I'm just lacking a seconder. No, you're the mover. Thank you, Councillor Kerr. The seconder, thank you, Councillor Sholem. I'm going to put that recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary? Carried. Thank you. Contrary, thank you. That will be noted. Now, Miss